February 19th, 1945. Before dawn, the island of Iwo Jima trembles. The ground itself seems alive, quaking under the thunder of naval guns offshore. From the tunnels beneath Mount Suribachi, Japanese officers stare through narrow slits in the volcanic rock. The sea glows red from tracer fire. Above them, ash drifts like snow. For days, they had waited. They believed this moment would prove what every imperial officer was taught: that the Americans, with their machines and numbers, had no spirit, that the sons of Bushido would outlast them. Then, through the chaos, came a sound none of them expected. From the smoke-covered beaches, as landing craft rammed against the shore, a long, echoing note pierced the roar of artillery, the call of the Marine Corps bugle. Another answered it, then another, hundreds of horns rising together over the battlefield. Clear, defiant, alive. In that instant, the Japanese officers froze. The sound carried a message older than war itself. The Americans had come, and they had spirit. For centuries, Japan's warrior class had built its identity on the concept of Bushido, the way of the warrior. Honor, loyalty, and death before surrender were not just values. They were the pillars of existence. By the 1930s, that ancient code had been reshaped by imperial propaganda into something unyielding, a belief that spiritual strength could triumph over material might. When Japan plunged into the Pacific War, its officers carried this faith into every campaign. To them, Western soldiers fought for paychecks and survival. Japanese soldiers fought for the emperor and for eternity. That conviction burned fiercely through the early years of conquest. From the jungles of Malaya to the fortress of Singapore, from the Philippines to the Solomon Islands, Japanese commanders boasted that their Yamato Damashi, the Japanese spirit, could shatter any foreign army, no matter how industrially powerful. But by late 1944, that faith was being tested. The tide had turned. The loss of Saipan had brought American bombers within reach of Tokyo itself. The Imperial Navy had been crippled at Leyte Gulf. Japan's defensive perimeter was collapsing, island by island, mile by mile. Yet one volcanic rock remained directly on the path to Japan's heartland, Iwo Jima. 8 square miles of black ash and sulfur fumes, halfway between the Marianas and Tokyo. Useless to civilians, but priceless to war. From Iwo Jima's radar posts, the Japanese could spot incoming B-29s hours before they reached the mainland. From its airstrips, fighters could intercept and bleed the bombing runs before they ever touched home soil. To the Americans, seizing it meant safety for their crews and a forward base for the coming assault on Japan. To the Japanese, losing it meant the enemy could strike their homeland unhindered. The Imperial General Staff ordered the island to be held at all costs. To lead the defense, they chose Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, a man unlike most in Japan's military elite. Educated in the United States before the war, Kuribayashi had seen America's vast industrial capacity firsthand. He knew Japan could not outproduce it, and he doubted the old myth that spirit alone could prevail. Still, he accepted his assignment without protest. He arrived on Iwo Jima in June 1944, bringing with him 21,000 men, mostly from the 109th Division and Naval Garrison units. He walked the beaches, examined the rock, and came to one chilling conclusion. The island could not be held, but it could bleed the enemy. Kuribayashi began to dig. Unlike the suicidal Banzai defenders of earlier battles, he forbade wasteful charges. Instead, he built a fortress underground. More than 11 miles of tunnels, bunkers, ammunition stores, hospitals, and command posts carved deep into the rock. His men became ghosts beneath the earth. Every tunnel was connected, every firing point concealed. Artillery was hidden under camouflage, and could open fire from multiple angles. Machine guns were zeroed onto every inch of beach. Above them, Mount Suribachi, a 550-foot volcanic cone, became both fortress and tomb. Kuribayashi's message to his troops was clear. You will not die until you have killed 10 of the enemy. There would be no retreat, no surrender, no hope of rescue. He expected his men to die where they stood, but to make the Americans pay so dearly that Japan's homeland would gain time to prepare for the invasion to come. The Americans, meanwhile, prepared for what they believed would be a brief and bloody operation, perhaps 5 days at most. They called it Operation Detachment. In reality, it would take 36 days and cost more lives than any battle in Marine Corps history. On maps, Iwo Jima seemed small, a speck in a vast ocean. But for both nations, it represented far more than ground. It was a test of belief, whether the will of the human spirit could stand against the machinery of war. And at the heart of that test stood one man's conviction and another's misjudgment. Kuribayashi knew the Americans were not weak, but his superiors in Tokyo still clung to the illusion that the enemy lacked spirit. Soon, they would hear otherwise, in a sound that would echo across the smoke and sulfur, across the Pacific. While Kuribayashi's men dug into volcanic stone, the United States prepared a storm unlike any Japan had faced. The planners of Operation Detachment knew the task ahead: invade a fortress island defended by 21,000 soldiers with nowhere to retreat. But Iwo Jima was too vital to ignore. Its location, barely 750 miles from Tokyo, made it the perfect springboard for the B-29 superfortress raids hammering Japan. More importantly, the island's airfields could serve as emergency landing zones for crippled bombers limping home from the mainland. The mission fell to the U.S. Marine Corps, veterans of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Saipan. Under the command of Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith, 3 Marine divisions would form the assault: the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. They were backed by the largest naval bombardment in history up to that point. Over 450 ships, including battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and carriers. In total, 70,000 Marines would land on an island barely 8 square miles wide. Every inch of it was fortified. For 9 months before the invasion, American intelligence studied aerial photographs and captured documents. They expected a defense similar to Saipan, fanatical but brief, breaking after the first week. They were wrong. Kuribayashi had prepared something unprecedented, a battle designed to kill as many Americans as possible before his men were annihilated. He forbade suicide charges. He forbade fighting on the beaches. His plan was to let the Americans land and then destroy them from concealed positions once they were trapped in the open. But in Tokyo, far from the island's reality, senior officers continued to underestimate their enemy. They viewed American soldiers as dependent on machines, pampered by supply lines and technology. They mocked the idea that men who wrote letters home and counted calories could ever match the ferocity of Japan's warriors. Newspapers in Japan published phrases like, "The enemy fights with steel, but we fight with spirit." To the Imperial Army, spirit meant the power to transcend pain, hunger, or fear. It was what allowed a man with a bayonet to charge a tank. They believed the Americans lacked that essence, that when faced with hopeless odds, they would hesitate. What they failed to grasp was that American spirit came from something else entirely. It was not mystical. It was forged in training grounds, in brotherhood, and in the knowledge that every Marine next to you would fight until the last round was spent. It was the spirit of men who had already bled across half the Pacific and had no intention of stopping short of Japan itself. The Marines prepared with grim precision. Each division rehearsed landings on volcanic soil back in Hawaii. Engineers modified flamethrowers and Shermans with heavy armor to counter bunkers. Navy Seabees readied bulldozers and demolition teams to carve through the rock. Every branch of the American war machine moved in unison, a choreography of logistics, training, and sheer industrial power. Yet despite all the planning, no one truly knew what awaited them. The aerial bombardments that pounded Iwo Jima for 72 consecutive days had done little. Kuribayashi's men were buried so deep that even the heaviest shells barely scratched the surface. On February 16, 1945, the final naval barrage began. The sea erupted with flame. For 3 days, battleships unleashed over 22,000 shells. Observers reported that nothing could have survived. In the tunnels, Kuribayashi smiled faintly. He told his officers, "The enemy will think us dead. Then they will come ashore. And that is when we strike." 3 days later, before dawn, the horizon filled with landing craft. Thousands of Marines waited in silence, listening to the waves slap against the sides of their boats. They were told it would be easy. They were told resistance would crumble after the bombardment. But on Iwo Jima, silence reigned. No gunfire, no movement, only smoke drifting from the beaches. The Marines didn't yet know that beneath those sands, 21,000 men were waiting, unseen, unheard, disciplined to the last. And deep in the tunnels of Mount Suribachi, Japanese officers whispered their certainty. The Americans are strong in metal, but weak in soul. When the Marines finally landed on Iwo Jima's beaches, the myth of weak spirit began to dissolve grain by grain. They came ashore into a storm of black ash that swallowed boots to the ankles, smoke so thick that the sun disappeared. It was chaos. Tanks bogged down, communication lost, men stumbling under machine gun fire that seemed to come from nowhere. For the Japanese defenders, it was the moment they had been waiting for. They opened fire from hidden embrasures, cutting through the first waves with surgical precision. Each Marine who moved forward did so through courage measured in feet, not yards. To the Japanese observers, this was supposed to be the point where the Americans would break, where they would hesitate, retreat, regroup. Instead, they saw something else. Men who refused to yield. Small groups reformed, dragged the wounded out of fire, returned again and again toward the unseen enemy. The spirit that the Japanese dismissed as materialistic was being written in the sand with blood and willpower. It was not about dying for an emperor or ideology. It was about surviving for each other. The battlefield became a living contradiction. One side fighting for ideals of honor, the other for the men beside them. But both sides, in their own way, embodied spirit. Only their definition of it differed. Angle 2, the tactical mind general. Kuribayashi's defense of Iwo Jima remains one of the most brilliant tactical designs of the Pacific War. He turned the island itself into a weapon. His fortress was invisible, a labyrinth beneath the surface. While earlier Japanese commanders had chosen glory in open battle, Kuribayashi chose efficiency in death. He positioned his artillery in sealed casemates, moved command posts nightly, and used decoys to draw American fire. His goal was not victory, but maximum attrition. To the Americans, this was warfare unlike anything they had seen. Their naval guns had pulverized the surface, yet the defenders remained untouched. Every crater, every ridge could hide a machine gun. Every moment of silence could erupt into death. The Marines adapted. They brought forward tanks with flamethrowers, bulldozers to bury tunnel entrances, and mortars to collapse caves. It was a battle of adaptation, tactics evolving hour by hour. The Japanese soldiers, under strict orders, never revealed their positions until a clear target was within range. Even after being encircled, they fought on with disciplined coordination. emerging from tunnels behind American lines at night to attack command posts. To Kuribayashi, each delay was a victory. Every day the Americans spent on Iwo Jima was another day Japan could prepare for the next invasion. He had transformed the idea of defense from suicide into strategy. Yet, even as his tactics inflicted horrific casualties, he knew the outcome was fixed. The Americans had endless shells, fuel, and replacements. His men had none. But still they fought, because their commander believed that the measure of a soldier was not whether he won, but how long he could resist defeat. Angle 3. The weapon and the terrain Iwo Jima was more than a battlefield. It was an adversary in itself. Its very ground worked against both sides. The island was a volcano, a jagged landscape of ash, rock, and sulfur vents that turned into quicksand under bombardment. Marines called it the Black Hell. Tanks sank into the powder. Artillery recoil disappeared into the soft earth, and men collapsed from exhaustion after only a few yards of crawling. For the Japanese, the terrain was both shield and curse. Their tunnels provided safety but trapped heat and gas. Temperatures inside reached over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was thick with fumes, sweat, and gunpowder. Many suffocated before they ever faced the enemy. The Americans relied on every weapon they could bring. Flamethrowers became their most effective tool, a brutal answer to an invisible foe. Engineers crawled forward with hoses and fuel tanks, burning oxygen out of caves until silence followed. Sherman tanks fitted with Ronson flame projectors turned strongpoints into infernos. It was not just a war of bullets. It was a war against nature itself. Every inch of progress was paid for in flesh and fire. As Marines advanced toward Mount Suribachi, the volcano loomed like a living thing, its slopes streaked with smoke. Every step forward revealed another network of hidden guns, another ambush, another tunnel mouth that seemed to breathe fire. For the Japanese, it was sacred ground, the threshold to death. For the Americans, it was the key to the island. By the third day, the Marines had reached the base of Suribachi. Their losses were staggering, their supplies stretched thin, and the defenders still invisible. But the momentum had shifted. The Americans were no longer reacting to the island, they were consuming it. Kuribayashi's perfect defense was slowly being crushed under relentless pressure. Bulldozers sealing bunkers, and the rhythmic call of Marine bugles signaling advance after advance. Each horn blast was a heartbeat of the invasion. And soon, it would carry a meaning neither side could ignore. War on Iwo Jima was not only fought with weapons, it was fought inside the mind. For both sides, the island became a crucible of endurance where fear was constant and sleep was rare. The Marines faced an enemy they could rarely see. Every silence felt like a trap, every ridge a grave. At night, the air vibrated with the echo of unseen footsteps and muffled explosions deep underground. The psychological strain was relentless. The island itself seemed alive, whispering death from beneath their feet. For the Japanese, the battle was one of acceptance. Kuribayashi's soldiers knew there would be no extraction, no reinforcements. They were told that to die here was not failure, but fulfillment, the completion of their duty to the emperor. Their morale came from fatalism, but their fear was human. Letters later recovered from the tunnels revealed their quiet dread. One wrote, "It is dark, hot, and silent. We hear the enemy breathing above us. I do not think I will ever see the sky again." The Marines, too, fought exhaustion, loss, and shock. They witnessed comrades vanish in sudden blasts, carried the wounded through flame and ash, and advanced over the bodies of men they had eaten breakfast with hours earlier. Yet, they kept moving forward, not because they were unafraid, but because stopping meant dying. This was the difference that would redefine spirit. The Japanese fought to die well. The Americans fought to live another hour, and in that fight to live, through fatigue, horror, and grief, their willpower revealed a kind of spirit the Japanese command had never imagined. Angle 5, Leadership and Obedience. Two men, both disciplined, both patriotic, both trapped by circumstance, defined the moral contrast of Iwo Jima. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commander of the Japanese garrison, was a realist in an army that worshipped fantasy. He forbade suicide charges, knowing they wasted lives. He treated his soldiers as human beings, even writing to his wife about their suffering. "My men are admirable, but they are dying without water or light. I cannot bear to watch them go." He knew the Americans would eventually win, but he intended to make their victory cost them everything. His leadership was built on duty, not on illusion. Across the lines, Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith and the Marine commanders led through a different form of duty: pragmatism. They valued discipline, coordination, and morale above rhetoric. Orders were precise, brief, and rooted in trust between ranks. No speeches about honor, just tasks, objectives, and responsibility. Both sides believed they were defending something sacred. Kuribayashi fought for his homeland, his emperor, and the belief that his sacrifice might buy Japan time. The Marines fought for survival, for comradeship, and for the belief that every island won brought the war closer to ending. Obedience defined both, but the difference lay in its direction. For Japan, obedience served ideology. For America, it served the mission and the men next to you. Kuribayashi's leadership earned respect even from his enemies. After the war, captured letters and reports revealed that many Marines admired him as a soldier's soldier, a man who made them fight harder because he demanded their best. In the end, his name became synonymous with disciplined defiance, not fanaticism, but mastery of command. Angle 6, the symbol of the Bugles. By the battle's second week, the soundscape of Iwo Jima had changed. The artillery never stopped. The air was thick with the roar of engines and the crack of rifles echoing through tunnels. But sometimes, above it all, came a different sound: the metallic cry of the Marine Corps bugle. For centuries, the bugle had served as the heartbeat of battlefield communication, to signal advance, retreat, assembly, or victory. On Iwo Jima, it became more than that. It became a declaration of will. Each morning, as new units rotated to the front, buglers carried the instruments forward despite the danger. When Marines gained a few yards, a call would pierce the haze, a brief, rising note that told everyone still alive that progress had not stopped. It was a sound of order amid chaos, of defiance amid despair. The Japanese heard it too. At first, they dismissed it as arrogance, but over time, as the horn calls continued through bombardment, through counterattacks, through nights of flame and thunder, the sound took on a different weight. It was steady, unwavering, a human heartbeat in brass. For the Japanese soldiers buried in darkness, it was the sound of something they had been told the enemy lacked: unity born not of ideology, but of shared endurance. One survivor later recalled hearing the horns echo from the slopes of Suribachi and realizing they are calling to each other. They will not stop. That sound, the sound of the bugles, marked the moment when myth began to die. The idea that the Americans fought without soul, without devotion, without fire, shattered in every echoing note. Kuribayashi himself, listening in the tunnels, is said to have paused in silence as the horns echoed across the smoke. He understood, perhaps more than anyone, what they meant. The Americans had spirit, and it was unstoppable. As the bugles faded into the roar of battle, one truth became clear to both sides: The final test of spirit was not in who shouted louder, but in who refused to fall silent. And soon, on the slopes of Mount Suribachi, that truth would be carved into history. February 19th, 1945. The sea before Iwo Jima boiled with ships, the largest armada ever assembled for a single island. The horizon was steel, the sky, smoke, the air, thick with salt and cordite. As dawn broke, thousands of Marines climbed into landing craft. Engines coughed, waves slammed against metal hulls, and the smell of oil and fear mixed in the cold wind. Officers checked watches. At 08:59, naval bombardment ceased. For the first time in 3 days, silence, the calm before history. Then came the order: land the troops. At 09, the first wave hit the beach. For a few moments it seemed unreal. No gunfire, no resistance, only the hiss of volcanic sand under boots. Marines looked around in disbelief. The island appeared dead. But beneath that black surface, 21,000 men waited. General Kuribayashi had ordered complete silence until the beaches were full. Only then would his army strike. He watched from his underground command post, maps spread before him, telephone lines humming. When the beaches were crowded with men and vehicles, he gave the command. One word: fire. The island erupted. From hidden bunkers, artillery and mortars unleashed an inferno. Machine guns swept the beach with deadly precision. Shells tore through landing craft. Tanks burned, trucks exploded, and the fine black ash turned crimson beneath the wounded. Marines hit the ground, digging frantically into soil that offered no cover. Officers shouted through the chaos, trying to organize the pinned-down battalions. Some crawled forward only inches at a time. Others were cut down where they stood. The air was alive with sound, gunfire, screams, shouts for corpsmen, and the ceaseless pounding of naval guns firing back in blind retaliation. Smoke obscured the horizon. Radios jammed. For hours, no one truly commanded the beach. Only instinct and courage kept the line from breaking. Kuribayashi's plan had worked perfectly. By the end of the first day, the Marines had advanced barely 500 yards inland. Over 2,400 were dead or wounded. But something remarkable happened amid the slaughter. Even with their formations shattered, the Marines did not retreat. Small groups rallied around squad leaders, medics, and sergeants. Ordinary men leading extraordinary acts. When flamethrowers jammed, rifles emptied, or tanks were destroyed, they used shovels, grenades, bare hands. They refused to yield ground. Each time a machine gun nest opened fire, they marked it, flanked it, and burned it out. By nightfall, the beaches were littered with debris, torn flags, helmets, rifles half buried in ash. But the Marines held. They had landed, survived the ambush, and begun to crawl forward. That night, under a sky veiled in ash, the Japanese launched their first counterattack. From the tunnels, hundreds of soldiers emerged silently, creeping toward the American lines. They struck with grenades and bayonets, trying to overrun command posts in the dark. The fighting was hand-to-hand, brutal, wordless, feral. Marines fought by muzzle flash, stabbing and firing in close quarters until dawn revealed the carnage. Everywhere lay bodies, Japanese and American, tangled together in the same trenches. Kuribayashi's men had inflicted enormous casualties, but their own numbers were vanishing. Still, the Japanese command believed the Americans would lose their will. They believed no force could sustain such losses and continue fighting with purpose. But, as morning came, the Americans advanced again. On the third day, they reached the lower slopes of Mount Suribachi. Flamethrowers roared, tanks pushed forward, Engineers detonated cave mouths one after another. Marines carved their way up the mountain yard by yard. The air stank of sulfur and burned flesh. The wind howled like a furnace. From his post beneath Suribachi, Kuribayashi listened to the muffled explosions growing closer. He knew his southern defenses would fall, but that was part of his design. Suribachi was a decoy to draw the Americans into the center, where his main force still waited. He turned to an aide and said quietly, "If the enemy takes Suribachi, they will think victory is near. Then they will bleed more for it." And indeed, the mountain soon became the symbol both sides clung to. For the Americans, it was hope, a visible summit amid chaos. For the Japanese, it was honor, the heart of their defense. As the Marines fought upward, they used bugle calls to coordinate assaults through the smoke. Short, sharp bursts of brass cutting through the thunder. The sound carried down to the tunnels below, where Japanese soldiers paused, confused. Those bugles, echoing through the ash and fire, became more than signals. They became a voice, one that said, without words, "We are still here." Each blast challenged the myth that the Americans lacked the will to fight. Each call told the defenders that the invaders would not stop, no matter how deep the tunnels ran. By February 23rd, Marines reached the summit. From the top of Mount Suribachi, they raised a small flag on a piece of pipe scavenged from wreckage. Cheers erupted across the beaches below. Men who had seen nothing but death for days now looked up and saw color against the smoke. In the tunnels below, Kuribayashi's officers saw it too. And they heard, faintly, the bugles sounding again. The battle was far from over, but the meaning of spirit was already beginning to change. The flag on Suribachi was more than cloth on steel. It was a pulse, a heartbeat that spread through the entire island. Down below, men cheered, wept, or simply stared in disbelief. After days trapped on the beach, it felt like the world had tilted toward light. But Kuribayashi knew better. Suribachi was only one flank, a volcano gutted by fire and death. The true battlefield lay to the north, across a labyrinth of ridges, ravines, and bunkers. The area his engineers had spent months fortifying. There, every yard of ground had to be taken twice. Every hill was honeycombed with tunnels. Every cave could open into a machine gun nest or a sniper's perch. When the Marines advanced beyond the mountain, they entered hell again. Their ranks thinned, step by step, through the deadly maze of Nishi Ridge, Motoyama Airfield, and the Meat Grinder. Each position was fought over with grenades, flamethrowers, and bayonets, sometimes for a single bunker. The noise never stopped. Mortars rained down day and night. Smoke hung so thick it dimmed the sun. Men learned to move by touch, by instinct, by the feel of another's shoulder in the dark. Corpsmen crawled through fire to reach the wounded, dragging them through ash that clung like tar. Voices shouted for stretchers, water, ammunition. Some Marines had not slept in 4 days. They fought half-blind, coughing blood and dust, yet refused to stop. Kuribayashi watched from his command post, his face pale, his uniform smeared with soot. His telephone lines buzzed with frantic reports. Outposts lost, tunnels collapsing, ammunition gone. But he forbade the word retreat. He still believed that if his men fought long enough, American morale would crack first, yet even he began to feel doubt. In one intercepted report, his officers described American medics risking their lives to save the enemy, pulling wounded Japanese from burning caves. It made no sense under Bushido. Why would an enemy show mercy? Why would men fight with such fury, yet spare those they could kill? Kuribayashi stared at the report for a long time, then folded it without a word. The next morning, the Marines advanced again. They moved with grim silence now, faces hollow, eyes ringed with exhaustion. They no longer shouted slogans or cheers. They simply worked their way forward, precise, relentless, professional. Machine gun fire cut into them, but they advanced. Mortars fell, but they advanced. Every cave, every trench, every tunnel mouth burned, blasted, cleared. And each time, as the smoke cleared, the bugles sounded. Those short, metallic notes became the rhythm of the island. Cold, defiant, human. The Japanese soldiers hiding in the dark began to recognize them. The patterns, the meanings. At first, they believed it was some form of arrogance, a taunt. But soon they realized the bugles were not mockery. They were communication, unity, courage without words. One Japanese lieutenant wrote in his diary before he died, "The enemy has no fear. Their bugles are like our drums of war, but their sound carries sorrow, not pride. They fight without hatred." As days turned to weeks, that realization spread like a quiet infection through the defenders. The Americans' spirit was not loud, not ceremonial. It was mechanical, disciplined, and unbreakable. They did not fight for an emperor or for divine honor. They fought for each other. Kuribayashi's fortress was crumbling. His men were starving, cut off, and hunted through the tunnels they had built. The once precise coordination of his defense had devolved into isolated pockets of resistance. Each night, the surviving Japanese radioed fragments of messages, prayers, apologies, final poems. One signal from a forward bunker read simply, "We have no ammunition. We attack with bayonet. Long live the Emperor." Kuribayashi listened in silence. He removed his cap, bowed his head, and whispered, "You have done enough." Still, he refused to surrender. He ordered his remaining officers to regroup underground for a final stand. Not for victory, but for honor. On March 11th, the Marines found his outer tunnels. Flamethrowers roared into the darkness, followed by grenades and bulldozers sealing the mouths. The earth itself shook with fire. When the Marines cleared the rubble, they found only charred uniforms, melted rifles, and bodies clutching swords that would never be drawn again. Kuribayashi was gone. His body was never found. When the island finally fell on March 26th, it was a wasteland, black, burned, and silent. Over 21,000 Japanese soldiers were dead. Nearly 7,000 Americans lay beside them. The air still smelled of sulfur and blood. Yet among the Marines, there was no celebration, only exhaustion and grief. They had seen what courage looked like on both sides. They had learned that spirit was not born from flags or slogans. It came from endurance, mercy, and the refusal to surrender humanity. A war correspondent wrote in his notebook that night, "On this island of death, the Americans proved they had spirit, but in doing so, they also proved they had a soul." And across the sea, when the news reached Tokyo, a few surviving officers remembered the bugles they had once mocked. The sound that echoed across the black sands still haunted them. The sound that told them the truth. The Americans had not lacked spirit. They had simply defined it differently. When the guns fell silent on Iwo Jima, the island itself seemed to breathe again. Smoke drifted over the black sands where thousands had died. The sea was calm, uncaring, eternal, washing gently against the wreckage of war. In the months that followed, American engineers built airstrips where the dead had fallen. Those runways would soon save thousands of bomber crews forced to land short on their return from Japan. Iwo Jima, once a fortress of death, became a refuge for the living. But beyond strategy and statistics, the battle had revealed something deeper, something that could not be measured in territory or victory. It had stripped away the illusions each side held about the other. The Japanese had believed that Americans, born of comfort and commerce, lacked spirit. They imagined that true courage could only come from sacrifice for a divine cause. Yet on that barren island, they witnessed another kind of strength. The quiet, enduring spirit of men who fought not for empire, but for one another. And the Americans, in turn, learned that their enemy was not a faceless force. They had faced soldiers who fought with discipline, devotion, and a courage that demanded respect. When the battle ended, they buried the Japanese dead with the same care they gave their own. In that act, the two notions of spirit, one forged in loyalty, the other in brotherhood, met for a brief, wordless moment. Neither side won that moment. Both were changed by it. For the rest of the war, the lessons of Iwo Jima echoed through every briefing, every landing, every silent prayer before combat. Victory would come, but it would carry the weight of what had been learned on that volcanic rock. That even in the most terrible places, humanity endures. Today, the flag that once rose over Mount Suribachi is preserved not only as a symbol of triumph, but as a testament to the paradox of war. That courage can exist on both sides. That spirit needs no uniform, no emperor, no god. Only resolve, sacrifice, and compassion. And if you listen closely, through the wind that still crosses the Pacific, you might still hear the faint echo of those bugles, calling not to battle, but to remembrance.